On October the 21st, 1978, a young pilot called Frederick Valentich took off from Melbourne in Australia. He was never seen again. His disappearance made headlines all over the world because of a taped conversation he'd had with air traffic control just before he vanished. 19 years on, his family is still searching for an answer.
The aircraft has just passed over me at least 1,000 feet above, over.
And it is a large aircraft, confirm?
Unknown to the speed it's travelling. Is there any Air Force aircraft in the vicinity?
Yes, that's him. It's my son.
19 years ago, Frederick Valentich was a young pilot in the Australian Air Training Corps.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I will never forget that morning of 21st of October 1978 when I was at the breakfast table and Frederick came in. He was a bit moody sometimes, but that particular day he was very cheerful, and he looked out the window. What a glorious day to take a flight, he says.
You going flying?
Yep. Going over to King Island, pick up some crayfish. Crayfish?
Can I come too?
That was the last time I actually have a contact with my son.
Frederick set out for King Island in a hired Cessna plane. It was to be his first evening flight over water. On the other side of the city, at Melbourne Flight Service Centre, Steve Roby came on shift. Frederick's plane's call sign was Delta Sierra Juliet. 40 minutes after takeoff, he contacted Steve at the Flight Service Centre and started to describe something extraordinary.
Think that's Saturday?
Yep.
What follows is from the transcript of the words which were spoken that night.
Melbourne, Delta Sierra Juliet. Is there any known traffic below 5,000?
Delta Sierra Juliet, stand by.
At about 7 o'clock, he reported sighting a large aircraft in his vicinity, and which surprised me.
Pilot reports aircraft. Are you holding any details?
I checked with various other areas to see if something had slipped through the net, but there was nothing of that nature.
Delta Sierra Juliet, no known traffic.
Melbourne, Delta Sierra Juliet. It seems to be a large aircraft, below 5,000.
What type of aircraft is it?
I can't confirm. It's got 4 bright lights. It seems to be like landing lights.
When he mentioned the 4 bright lights, well, I imagined that he was looking at a large military aircraft.
Mick, have you got any military aircraft in the Cape Otway area? No known aircraft in the vicinity.
It's approaching now from due east towards me.
At that stage, I was thinking sort of rationally that here I have an unidentified military aircraft operating in my airspace of which I have no knowledge.
It seems to me that he's playing some kind of game. He's flying over me about three times at speeds I can't identify. It's got like a green light and sort of metallic like. It's like all shiny on the outside. It's just vanished.
Confirmed, the aircraft just vanished.
Say again?
Is the aircraft still with you?
Now approaching from the southwest.
I don't think it was a military aircraft. I don't think it was an aircraft.
Delta Sierra Juliet.
Melbourne, that strange aircraft is hovering on top of me again.
An aeroplane just wouldn't do that sort of thing. So my belief changed as the communication continued from one of, it was initially an aeroplane, to one of, it must be something else.
It's hovering and it's not an aircraft.
And I thought, well, it's not an aircraft and it's been doing the things that he's describing. It must be a UFO.
I've got it set at 23, 24 and the thing is coughing.
Delta Sierra Juliet.
Melbourne, that strange aircraft is hovering on top of me again. It's hovering and it's not an aircraft.
Delta Sierra Juliet.
Delta Sierra Juliet, Melbourne.
Delta Sierra Juliet, Melbourne. Delta Sierra Juliet.
That was the final communication.
Delta Sierra Juliet.
I felt to a degree helpless. I mean, you can only do so much on the other end of the radio.
Search and rescue, this is Melbourne Flight Service. Commence final alert stage. Delta Sierra Juliet fails to respond. Estimated position south of Cape Otway.
A massive search for Frederick was launched, which lasted 4.5 days.
It was an unusual incident, and the search and rescue people wanted to determine whether an unidentified flying object did have any relevance to the aircraft's disappearance. I think we had just about every available plane in the air. We had practically a whole fishing fleet in Bass Strait. Had police ground searching. We even had the Navy involved with sonar, but nothing was ever found.
The only evidence of what had happened that night was the tape recording of Frederick and Steve Roby's conversation. Guido was called in by the police to identify his son's voice.
The aircraft has just passed over me at least 1,000 feet above, over.
And it is a large aircraft, confirm?
It's hovering and it's not an aircraft.
What might have happened to Frederick at that point, it is a multi-million-dollar question.
The Ministry of Aviation refused to release the tape to the press, but did release a transcript of the conversation. The UFO content made news headlines worldwide.
We had to look at every possible scenario that came up.
It's hovering and it's not an aircraft.
These, after all, were the last words that this man was known to issue.
Delta Sierra Juliet.
Whenever I've thought about it since the event, I've always felt that he somehow wanted to stage his own disappearance. He possibly wanted to suicide. He was a bit strange. He was into UFOs. He's had a bedroom full of material on UFOs, and he didn't file a return flight plan. I tend to think that he wanted to disappear. He wanted to fly off into the sunset and never come back.
Delta Sierra Juliet, do you copy?
Fred had no strong reason, I believe, to undertake any faking of the scene or whatever it might be. He had a very strong relationship with his parents. He could see where he was going to head. He wanted to be the youngest registered commercial pilot in Australia in a short period of time, and he was on the road to doing that. And that's why I can't see any reason for him to do this.
It's got 4 bright lights, and it seems to be like landing lights.
One of the theories that was around at the time was that Fred had become disoriented, because when you're flying along, particularly at dusk when you can't see the horizon, you could quite easily be flying along upside down. Now, there were 2 lighthouses. There were the aircraft navigation lights. As you got close to the water, they would be reflecting from the water. That could quite easily have been the lights he saw. And if you were doing that, of course, crashing into the sea is a very likely thing to happen. We will never know if that's true, but it's a very plausible explanation for what happened, far more plausible than the UFO explanation.
He's playing some kind of game.
The explanation or suggestion that Frederick Valentich was flying upside down in his Cessna just doesn't hang together, simply because we're dealing with a situation that lasted 6 minutes, and the mechanics, particularly of the fuel system, it just wouldn't allow the Cessna to fly upside down for 6 minutes. And the problem, unfortunately, we have is we don't have Frederick to talk to, and we don't have the Cessna, and until such time as either one of those things are available, perhaps this mystery is always going to be that.
Delta Sierra Juliet, do you copy?
Nearly 20 years later, the official files on Frederick's disappearance remain open. Guido is still no nearer to discovering what happened to his son.
I'm very confused. I don't know what to think. On the 21st of October, I like to go to Cape Otway, and I'm going there because I'm hoping that one day somebody might send me a message that could really reveal the great mystery of my Frederick disappearance.
That's it for this week. On our next programme... The Agatha Christie mystery. Why did she fake her own disappearance? And the man who dreamt himself a fortune. Until then, on Mysteries, goodbye.